A struggling waiter offers the last of his earnings to pay for a stranger's coffee. 7 days later, she returns with an unthinkable proposal, one that could change his life forever. What was her true intention? Each morning, as the first rays of sunlight slip through towering city buildings, Noah steps into the cramped cafe he calls his battleground. His tired hands wipe down tables, and a forced smile masks the exhaustion etched into his face. Behind that smile is a life crumbling under the weight of unpaid rent and relentless threats from an unyielding landlord. Noah fights on, hoping his quiet perseverance will somehow be enough. Whispers from another world drift through the cafe, tales of the city's wealthy elite who sometimes grace its corners. To Noah, their lives are a distant fantasy, shimmering with secrets he will never know. Yet, in fleeting moments of solitude, a haunting question echoes through his mind. Does hard work ever truly pay off? At night, his small apartment offers little comfort. The flicker of a lonely lamp reflects the isolation that gnaws at him. But today, something is different. A hush falls over the cafe as a woman, dressed impeccably and radiating power, walks in. Her presence silences the room. Who is she, and why does her arrival feel like the opening of a door no one never knew existed? The cafe buzzed with the usual chatter of customers, the clinking of cups, and the low hum of music. Suddenly, the door opened, and a woman stepped inside. Her entrance felt different. Heads turned as her refined elegance collided with the visible crack in her demeanor. She clutched an empty handbag tightly, her movements rushed yet controlled, as if she were trying to hold herself together. Evelyn, though unknown to most, exuded an air of authority. Yet tonight, something was off. Her carefully composed face betrayed a flicker of desperation. The staff exchanged quiet glances, sensing the weight of her presence. Customers fell silent, watching as she approached the counter. Her voice, steady but strained, barely masked her unease as she ordered a simple coffee. Noah, standing behind the counter, could not help but notice the subtle tremor in her hands. He watched as she fumbled through her purse, searching for something that was not there. Her eyes darted around the cafe, a silent plea for help hidden behind her polished facade. Without hesitation, Noah stepped forward. "Ma'am, it is all right. I will cover this for you." His voice was calm, almost too calm for someone who had just sacrificed what little he had left. Evelyn looked at him, her gaze piercing yet unreadable. For a moment, it seemed as though she wanted to speak, but she simply nodded and took the coffee he offered. The cafe fell into a strange silence. Who was this woman? And why did her presence feel like the start of something none of them could have anticipated? Noah stood frozen behind the counter, his eyes fixed on Evelyn. Her trembling hands hovered over her purse, searching desperately for something that was not there. Her usually composed demeanor was unraveling, piece by piece, under the weight of silent panic. The cafe buzzed softly around her, but her struggle seemed to freeze time. Customers whispered in curiosity, their gazes darting between Evelyn and Noah. "Miss, I can hold your coffee order for you," Noah offered gently, though his voice betrayed a slight hesitation. Evelyn's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Her eyes, clouded with frustration and embarrassment, locked onto his for a fleeting moment. That brief exchange spoke volumes. Noah's thoughts raced. His day's tips, a handful of crumpled bills tucked into his apron pocket, were all that stood between him and a bare refrigerator. But something in Evelyn's eyes, something unspoken yet heavy with meaning, stopped his hesitation. He took a deep breath. "It is all right," Noah said louder this time. "I will take care of it." Evelyn blinked in disbelief, her lips trembling into a faint, grateful smile. You do not have to do that," she managed to say, her voice soft and wavering. "I insist," he replied, sliding the crumpled bills toward the register. "We all have days like this." As he handed her the steaming cup of coffee, a wave of doubt crept over him. Was this kindness, or was it recklessness? The money he had just given away had been meant for dinner, for survival. Yet, as Evelyn thanked him softly and walked to a corner seat, he convinced himself that small acts of kindness mattered. But in the quiet moments that followed, as he wiped down the counter and stared at the now empty tip jar, a knowing thought whispered in his mind. Had he made a mistake he could not afford? The cafe returned to its rhythm, but Noah could not shake the feeling that his life had shifted in a way he could not yet understand. As Noah pulled the cafe's heavy doors closed, the sound of the lock clicking echoed in the empty street. A chill crept over him, not from the cold night air, but from the knowing sense that his life was spiraling out of control. His feet dragged along the pavement, each step weighed down by the haunting whispers of his mind. What now? How much more can I take? When he finally reached his apartment, a familiar sight greeted him, a harsh white eviction notice pinned to his door. The bright letters screamed at him, "Final warning." Noah's heart sank. He tore the paper from the door, his trembling hands struggling to read the words through the blur of his frustration. "This is not fair," he muttered under his breath, his voice breaking. "I worked so hard, and still—" Before he could finish the thought, his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He hesitated before pulling it out, half dreading the message awaiting him. It was from his younger sister. "Noah, we need money for Dad's medicine. It is urgent. Please call me back." The air felt heavy as Noah leaned against his door, sliding down until he was sitting on the cold, cracked tiles of the hallway. His mind raced. Rent was overdue. His tips were gone. And now his family was reaching out for help he did not know how to give. "Noah, you are failing everyone," he whispered to himself, his voice filled with bitterness. He gripped his phone tightly, staring at the text. How could he say no? But how could he say yes? Memories of his kind gesture at the cafe resurfaced, taunting him. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the wave of regret. Was it worth it? He asked himself aloud, his voice echoing in the silence. The world around him seemed to grow darker, the walls of his life closing in tighter. Noah knew he was standing on a cliff's edge, but what lay on the other side of his next decision was a mystery he feared to confront. The cafe buzzed with morning energy, the clatter of cups and quiet chatter filling the air. Noah kept his head down, wiping the counter. His mind replayed the events of the previous day, a mix of pride and regret swirling inside him. He had used his last tip to pay for that mysterious woman's coffee. But now, doubt crept in. Across the room, his coworker leaned against the coffee machine, smirking as they watched Noah. "You are too soft, Noah," they said with a sarcastic laugh. "Do you really think kindness is going to pay your rent this month?" The words hit harder than Noah expected, cutting through his already fragile confidence. "I was just trying to help," Noah replied quietly, avoiding their gaze. "Help?" The coworker scoffed, shaking their head. "You are barely helping yourself, spending money on someone you do not even know. That is not noble, Noah. That is just foolish." Noah swallowed a lump rising in his throat, the weight of the comment settling heavily on his shoulders. "It is not about the money," he said softly, but his voice wavered. "Sometimes people just need someone to care." The coworker chuckled, pouring another cup of coffee. "Good luck with that. Let me know when your kindness pays off." They walked away, leaving Noah standing in silence. The words echoed in his mind, each syllable twisting like a knife. Had he been foolish? Was this a mistake he could not afford? He thought of the eviction notice on his door, the messages from his family pleading for financial help, and the overwhelming sense that he was falling deeper into a hole he could not climb out of. Noah took a deep breath, gripping the counter to steady himself. "Kindness matters," he whispered, as if trying to convince himself. But a darker thought lingered. What if they were right? What if he had sacrificed too much for someone who would not even remember his name? As the cafe bustled on, Noah felt the weight of his choices pressing down, the line between hope and regret blurring with every passing moment. Noah sat on the edge of his worn-out couch, staring blankly at the stack of bills on the coffee table. His mind raced, searching for solutions he knew did not exist. Just then, a loud knock echoed through the small apartment, breaking the heavy silence. He hesitated before answering, already knowing who it was. The landlord stood in the dimly lit hallway, arms crossed, an impatient scowl etched on his face. "No," he said firmly, "this is your final warning. If I do not have the rent by the end of the week, the locks will be changed. No exceptions." Noah opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The weight of the ultimatum pressed down on him like a vice. "I just need a little more time," he finally managed to say, his voice trembling. "I am working double shifts. I will have it soon." The landlord shook his head, his expression cold. "I have heard that before. Time is up, Noah. By Friday or you are out." As the door slammed shut, Noah sank back into the couch, his heart pounding. Desperation clawed at him, each option he considered more impossible than the last. He thought of his family's messages, their pleas for financial help, and the guilt of knowing he could not do anything for them. "I cannot fail them," he whispered to himself, but the words felt hollow. His mind replayed the landlord's warning, the sharp finality of it cutting deeper with every repetition. He buried his head in his hands, wondering how everything had spiraled so far out of control. The week's end felt like a ticking time bomb, and Noah could hear every second slipping away. Noah's hands trembled as he cleaned the countertop, his thoughts clouded by the weight of unpaid rent and unanswered calls from family. He barely noticed the manager walking up until a sharp voice cut through his haze. "Noah, a word," the manager said, his tone cold and clipped. Noah froze, glancing nervously around the bustling cafe before following him to a quiet corner. The manager's arms were crossed, his expression stern but controlled, like someone delivering a well-rehearsed speech. "Noah," he began, his voice lowering, "I know life outside of work can be tough, but we cannot afford distractions here. Customers expect efficiency, and the staff needs to pull their weight. Lately," he paused, studying Noah's face. "Lately, I have noticed your focus slipping." Noah's throat tightened. He wanted to defend himself, but the words refused to form. Instead, he stood there, gripping the edge of his apron like it was the only thing tethering him to reality. The manager leaned in slightly, his tone turning pointed. "If this continues, we might have to reconsider your position. This is not a charity, Noah. Keep your personal issues out of work, or we will have no choice." The words hit harder than Noah expected. He nodded mechanically, unable to meet the manager's gaze. "I understand," he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. The manager gave a curt nod and walked away, leaving Noah standing alone. A wave of shame and anger washed over him. He clenched his fist, trying to push away the thoughts swirling in his mind. Was he really letting everything slip through his fingers? Could he even recover from this? As he returned to the counter, the whispers of nearby coworkers stung like needles. He overheard snippets of their hushed conversation, half laughs and subtle jabs about kindness not paying the bills. The weight of their judgment pressed down on him, threatening to crush what little resolve he had left. Noah exhaled shakily, forcing himself to keep moving, to keep working. But in the back of his mind, one question loomed larger with each passing second. How much longer could he hold on? Noah sat at the counter, his eyes fixed on the door as if willing Evelyn to walk through it. Each passing hour chipped away at his hope, leaving a knowing void in its place. She had vanished without a trace, and the silence spoke louder than any explanation could. The whispers started as soon as the regulars noticed her absence. So much for gratitude. One coworker sneered during a lull in the cafe's rush. Another chimed in, shaking their head. She probably ran off laughing at how easy it was to fool him. Noah clenched his jaw, their words striking chords of doubt he had tried to silence. Deep down, he wrestled with the possibility that they might be right. Had he been naive? Had he placed his trust in someone who never intended to honor it? The thought clawed at him, driving up memories of her poised yet desperate demeanor that night. It all seemed so real, her trembling voice, the way her fingers gripped the coffee cup as if it were her lifeline. Could all of that have been an act? Noah rubbed his temples, frustration bubbling over. He wanted to believe in the goodness of his choice, but the weight of regret felt heavier with each passing moment. His mind replayed the moment he handed over his last bit of cash. The spark of hope he had felt then now felt foolish, reckless even. "Do you really think she will come back?" A voice cut through his thoughts. It was another coworker, their tone dripping with sarcasm. Noah did not respond, but the question lingered. Had he sacrificed too much for a stranger's fleeting promise? Still, a small part of him clung to the possibility that there was more to her story. What if she was not the person they assumed? What if there was a reason for her absence? These questions kept the embers of hope alive, even as doubt threatened to snuff them out. Noah exhaled deeply, staring at the clock. Another day had passed, and still no sign of Evelyn. But something in his gut told him this chapter was far from over. He just had to wait. 7 days had passed, each one slower than the last. The faint hope that Evelyn would return had turned into a shadow of regret. Noah sat in the dim light of his apartment, the silence pressing against him like a weight he could not escape. He stared at the empty coffee mug on his table, a bitter reminder of the kindness he had offered and the uncertainty that followed. Did I make a mistake? The question had become a constant refrain in his mind. He replayed the moment he handed over the last of his tip money, convincing himself it was the right thing to do. But now, with no sign of Evelyn and no explanation for her absence, doubt crept in like a cold wind. His phone vibrated, breaking the stillness. A message from his coworker lit up the screen. "Heard anything from your mystery woman, or has she vanished for good?" Noah clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to reply. The sneering tone in their words only deepened the sting of his own insecurities. Each evening in his cramped apartment felt heavier than the last. The flickering bulb overhead cast long shadows, mirroring the unease that had settled in his chest. He had sacrificed what little he had for a stranger, and now he questioned everything. Was her story even real? The thought gnawed at him, driving his spirits lower with every passing hour. He closed his eyes, trying to silence the barrage of questions. Yet one refused to fade. What if I trusted the wrong person? The possibility left him hollow, but another thought followed, a faint whisper of hope. What if there was more to Evelyn's story, something he could not yet see? That hope, fragile as it was, kept him from giving in entirely to despair. The clock ticked on, the hours melting into the night. Noah exhaled deeply, the air heavy with uncertainty. The silence in his apartment was deafening, but it carried a question that refused to let go. Had his act of kindness been a mistake, or was there a greater truth waiting to be uncovered? For now he could only wait, his heart caught between regret and the faint glimmer of faith. The air in the cafe was heavy with unspoken judgments. Every time Noah moved between tables, he could feel the weight of watchful eyes. A whisper here, a stifled laugh there. It was clear that his coworkers and even the regular customers had become spectators in his life. "So, Noah," a coworker smirked as they stacked plates behind the counter, their tone dripping with sarcasm. "Any sign of your generous lady friend? Or did she vanish with your hard-earned money?" Noah kept his head down, refusing to respond. He focused on wiping the counter, but his hands trembled ever so slightly. The snickers continued, low but loud enough to sting. "Kindness does not pay the bills. You know," another voice chimed in, this one from a customer seated nearby. Noah's ears burned, but he forced himself to smile as he delivered their coffee. The words lingered in the air, twisting like a knife in his chest. Each murmur felt louder than the clatter of dishes, each glance sharper than the corners of the tables he cleaned. Noah's spirit, already fragile, felt like it was beginning to splinter under the relentless pressure. He could not shake the feeling of being judged, not just for his actions, but for who he was. That evening, during a quiet moment by the espresso machine, one of the senior staff approached him. Their tone was softer but no less cutting. "Look, Noah, you are a good guy, but you need to stop being so naive. People will take advantage of you if you let them. Do yourself a favor and toughen up." Noah nodded silently, his throat tight. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he had acted out of faith, not foolishness. But the words would not come. How could he justify an act of kindness when even he was starting to doubt its worth? As he left the cafe that night, the shadows seemed longer, the walk home colder. The constant whispers of the day replayed in his mind, louder and more accusing with each step. Had he been wrong? The question haunted him, lingering like a storm on the horizon. Noah clenched his fists, his resolve faltering but not entirely broken. Deep down, he still held on to the faint hope that his act of kindness had not been in vain. But for now, the weight of regret and judgment was almost too much to bear. Noah stared at the stack of unopened bills on his tiny kitchen table. Each envelope was a reminder of the pressure mounting around him. The landlord's final warning replayed in his mind, like a clock ticking down. Every option seemed bleak, but doing nothing was no longer an option. That night, as Noah sat in his dimly lit apartment, his phone buzzed. A text from an old acquaintance appeared on the screen. It read, "Quick cash, low effort, no questions asked. Call me if you're interested." The words stayed on the screen, glowing in the dark. Noah hesitated but dialed the number. A gruff voice answered, "I knew you call, Noah. Times are tough, huh? I've got a job for you. Nothing illegal, just moving some goods from one place to another. Easy money." Noah's grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of goods?" he asked cautiously. The man chuckled, a sound that sent a chill down Noah's spine. "Nothing you need to worry about. Just think of it as a delivery service. You'll get enough to cover your rent in one night." The promise of quick money was intoxicating, but Noah's gut twisted with unease. "I'll think about it," he muttered before hanging up. The following morning, Noah replayed the conversation in his head. At the cafe, he worked in a daze. His co-workers noticed his distracted demeanor. "You look worse than usual," one of them joked. "What's eating you now?" Noah forced a smile but offered no explanation. Inside, he felt a storm brewing, a mix of fear, doubt, and desperation. Every quiet moment was consumed by the temptation of the offer. It was dangerous, but the alternative was losing everything. That evening, the acquaintance called again. "Listen, Noah," the voice said sharply, "opportunities like this don't come often. Do you want to solve your problems or not?" Noah closed his eyes, his chest tightening. He thought of the eviction notice, the whispered judgments at work, and the growing weight of his circumstances. Was this his way out, or would it drag him deeper into despair? "Give me until tomorrow," Noah replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The line went dead, but the unease remained. Noah knew he was standing on the edge of a decision that could change everything. As the hours ticked by, the silence of his apartment grew heavier. Was this the escape he needed, or a trap waiting to close around him? His mind raced as he stared at the crumpled bills on the table, the unopened envelopes, and his phone blowing faintly in the dark. Noah sat frozen, knowing that by morning he would have to make a choice, one he might never be able to take back. Noah sat at the corner table during his break, staring blankly at the coffee cup in his hands. The faint chatter of customers filled the cafe, but his mind was elsewhere. The weight of Evelyn's disappearance lingered like a shadow, growing heavier with each passing day. It was then that Alex, his longtime friend and coworker, slid into the seat across from him. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Alex remarked, leaning in. "What's going on?" Noah hesitated but finally spoke. "Remember the woman from last week? The one I helped? She has not come back. I feel like maybe I was a fool to trust her." Alex raised an eyebrow and leaned back in his chair. "Noah, you're too kind for your own good, but sometimes kindness can be dangerous. Let me tell you a story." Noah tilted his head, intrigued. Alex's tone had shifted, serious and almost foreboding. "A few years ago, I knew someone like you. His name was Daniel. He met this charming woman at his favorite diner. She seemed perfect, too perfect. They got close fast, and before he knew it, she was borrowing money, asking for favors, and making promises she never kept. By the time Daniel realized it, she was gone, left him broke and broken." Alex paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Noah felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Are you saying she used him?" Alex nodded. She played him like a violin, and the worst part, he blamed himself. Thought he had done something wrong. But Noah, some people, they know how to manipulate kindness. Noah's chest tightened as Alex's story painted an unsettling picture. Was Evelyn another Daniel stranger? The doubt that had been lurking in the back of his mind began to grow roots. But Evelyn was different, Noah countered, his voice faltering. She looked like she needed help. Alex leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. Noah, I am not saying you did the wrong thing, but think about it. You barely know her. You gave up what little you had for someone who has now disappeared. Does that sound normal to you? Noah had no response. The truth of Alex's words stung, but they were impossible to ignore. That night, as Noah lay in bed, the echoes of Alex's caution haunted him. Every detail about Evelyn replayed in his mind. Her frantic demeanor, her gratitude, her mysterious absence. The questions became relentless. Who was she really? Why had she not come back? And most painfully, had she taken advantage of his trust? The answers eluded him, but one thing was certain. Noah's faith in his own judgment had been shaken. The shadows of doubt continued to grow, casting Evelyn in an entirely new light. What was once a moment of compassion now felt like the beginning of a cruel lesson. The clock on Noah's bedside table glowed faintly, marking another restless night. The silence of his cramped apartment was absolute, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind spinning with thoughts of Evelyn, unpaid bills, and the cruel whispers at work. Just as his eyelids began to feel heavy, a sharp buzz pierced the quiet. Startled, he reached for his phone, fumbling in the dark. The screen illuminated with an unknown number. His heart raced. Who could be calling him at this hour? His first thought was his family. Was something wrong? Anxiety gripped him as he hesitated, his finger hovering over the answer button. Finally, he pressed it. "Hello," he whispered, his voice shaky. There was no response. Only static hummed faintly on the other end. "Hello," he repeated louder this time. The static grew louder for a moment, and then click. The line went dead. Noah sat up, clutching the phone tightly. The silence that followed felt oppressive, heavier than any noise could have been. He stared at the screen, his breathing uneven. Was it a prank? A wrong number? Or something else entirely? A chill ran down his spine at the thought. Unable to shake the unease, he scrolled through his recent calls, checking the number again. It was unfamiliar, and there were no clues to its origin. He placed the phone down, but his mind refused to rest. The call replayed in his head, the faint static, the sudden end, the ominous quiet that followed. What if this was connected to Evelyn? The thought crept in uninvited, filling him with doubt and fear. She had disappeared without a trace, and now this. It felt too coincidental. His heart thudded in his chest as paranoia began to take hold. Noah rose from the bed and paced the small room, his shadow stretching across the dim walls. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of the wind outside, felt amplified, sinister. He checked the locks on his door twice before returning to bed, but sleep would not come. As the hours passed, his exhaustion deepened, but so did the questions. Who had called him? What did they want? And why had they chosen this moment, when his life already felt on the verge of unraveling? The quiet of the night offered no answers, only the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. Noah stepped outside his apartment early in the morning, the chill in the air matching the weight in his chest. His eyes fell on an envelope resting on the doormat. It was plain, unmarked, and seemed out of place. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should even touch it. Curiosity got the better of him. He picked it up, the paper cold against his fingers, and tore it open with cautious hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 4 words were scrawled in sharp, almost menacing handwriting. Patience has a price. Noah's pulse quickened. He looked around, hoping to spot someone who might have left it there, but the hallway was empty. The note felt heavier than it should, like it carried a secret only he was meant to uncover. What is this supposed to mean? He whispered to himself, clutching the note tightly. The words replayed in his mind all day as he tried to focus at work. Every sound, every glance from a customer felt amplified. The memory of the midnight call lingered, tying itself to this new mystery. Was this connected? Or was his mind creating connections where there were none? 2 days later, another envelope appeared. This time it was slid halfway under his door. He picked it up with trembling hands, trading what he might find. Inside was a message just as cryptic: "Do not test the limits." The handwriting was identical, the tone equally unsettling. His heart sank as he felt the walls of his apartment closing in. Who was behind this, and why had they chosen him? By the end of the week, a third envelope arrived. Noah's anxiety spiraled as he read the chilling words: "Every choice demands a consequence." Each note seemed to whisper directly to his fears, toying with his sanity. He could not shake the feeling that someone was watching, waiting for him to falter. Noah confided in a coworker that afternoon. "What if this is some kind of warning, or a game someone is playing with me?" he asked, his voice shaky. "Maybe it is nothing," they replied with a forced calmness. "But then again, maybe it is something. You need to figure out who is doing this before it gets worse." Noah nodded, though his mind was far from calm. That evening, as he sat in his dimly lit apartment, the words from the notes echoed in his head. "Patience has a price. Do not test the limits. Every choice demands a consequence." Each phrase felt like a piece of a puzzle he was too terrified to solve. As he stared at the notes laid out before him, a single question burned in his mind: what do they want from me? And deep down, he feared the answer would cost more than he could give. Noah sat in his dimly lit apartment, the silence pressing against his ears like a weight he could not escape. Days had passed, but the cryptic notes, the static-filled phone call, and Evelyn's absence remained a puzzle he could not solve. His mind replayed every interaction, every moment, searching for a clue he might have missed. The more he thought, the less sense it all made, and the more trapped he felt in a web of unanswered questions. Each night, as he tried to sleep, the notes whispered to him in the darkness. Patience has a price. What did it mean? Was someone watching him? Was it connected to Evelyn? Or was his mind just piecing together fragments that did not belong? The air in his apartment grew heavy with dread, and every creak of the floorboards sent his heart racing. By the fifth night, Noah could barely eat. His thoughts spiraled out of control, each one more unsettling than the last. He reached for his phone, scrolling aimlessly through messages and missed calls, hoping for something, anything, that might break the silence. His thumb hovered over Evelyn's contact. Should he try calling her again, or would it only make things worse? He placed the phone down, his hands trembling. At work, the unease followed him like a shadow. His coworker approached him cautiously. "You look terrible, Noah. Are you all right?" they asked, concern etched on their face. He forced a weak smile. "I am fine, just a lot on my mind." "Is this about those notes?" the phone call. They pressed. "You should not let this eat away at you." Noah shook his head, unsure how to explain the storm raging inside him. "It is more than that. It feels like everything is connected, but I do not know how." "Maybe you are overthinking it," they suggested gently. "But if you feel unsafe, you should tell someone." The words lingered with him, but they offered no comfort. That night, Noah sat in the same chair he had occupied for hours, staring at the notes laid out before him. The questions in his mind seemed to echo in the stillness. Why had Evelyn disappeared without a word? Who was leaving these messages? And why did the silence feel more threatening than any words ever could? As the clock ticked past midnight, a cold realization settled over him. The answers he was searching for might never come, and yet, the absence of answers was its own kind of torment, one that chipped away at his sanity with each passing hour. Noah leaned back, his eyes closing against the weight of his thoughts. Somewhere in the depths of his mind, a single, haunting thought surfaced. What if this was only the beginning? Noah stared at the notes scattered on his desk, their cryptic words gnawing at his mind. Patience has a price. The phrase repeated itself over and over like a haunting melody he could not silence. He rubbed his temples, the weight of his thoughts pressing down harder with each passing day. The silence of his apartment was suffocating, but the storm inside him was louder than any noise could ever be. The choices he had made played back in his mind like an unrelenting movie reel. His sacrifices for Evelyn, the risks he had taken, the debt he had accumulated, all of it felt like a chain tightening around his neck. For what? To help a stranger who had vanished without a trace. To hold on to a fleeting sense of purpose. He gripped the edge of the table as a wave of regret washed over him. As the hours dragged on, his phone buzzed on the table. His heart skipped a beat, a flicker of hope rising. He grabbed it, but the screen showed a bank notification instead. Another overdraft fee. He let out a bitter laugh, tossing the phone aside. Of course, he muttered under his breath, his voice laced with frustration. Later that evening, his friend Marcus called. "Noah, you sound off. What is going on?" Noah hesitated before responding. I do not know how to explain it, Marcus. It feels like everything is falling apart. Every decision I have made, every step I have taken, it all feels wrong. Marcus sighed on the other end. Listen, Noah, sometimes the cost of doing the right thing is higher than we expect. But the question is, are you ready to pay it? The words hit Noah like a punch to the gut. He did not respond. Could he bear the weight of his own choices? Was he prepared for the consequences he could not yet see? He felt the tension in his chest deepen as Marcus continued. But do not ignore the signs, Noah. If you feel something is not right, trust your instincts. Otherwise, you might pay a price you cannot afford. Noah hung up the call, Marcus's words echoing in his mind. The room felt colder now, the shadows longer. He glanced back at the notes on his desk, their cryptic message taunting him. A chill ran down his spine as an overwhelming sense of doom settled over him. What if the answers he was chasing only led to more pain? What if his sacrifices were not just costly, but irreparable? Noah sat back in his chair, his hands trembling. For the first time, he wondered if he had walked into a trap he could never escape. Noah sat at the small wooden table in his apartment, the dim light from a flickering bulb above casting long shadows across the room. The silence felt heavier than usual, like an invisible force pressing against his chest. His thoughts churned endlessly, circling back to the same question. What was he truly risking by entertaining Evelyn's deal? The answers, elusive and shadowy, only deepened his sense of unease. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the last few weeks pressing harder than ever. Am I losing myself? He murmured to no one, but the echoing walls, the financial burdens, the cryptic notes, and Evelyn's piercing gaze. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't solve. And now, her ultimatum hung over him like a storm cloud, threatening to unleash chaos at any moment. His phone buzzed on the table, jolting him from his thoughts. He grabbed it, half expecting another message from Evelyn. Instead, it was his friend Marcus. "Noah, you need to talk to someone before this consumes you," Marcus began, his voice steady but laced with concern. "Talk about what?" Noah snapped, frustration seeping into his tone. "About how I might have traded everything for nothing. About how I might already be too deep to climb out." Marcus sighed. "You are not too deep, but you need to think carefully. Evelyn's deal might solve your problems today, but what about tomorrow? What will it cost you?" The words stung because they echoed his own fears. "I do not know, Marcus," he admitted, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It feels like everything I do only makes things worse." The call ended shortly after, but Marcus's words lingered. Noah looked at the pile of bills on his desk, each one a reminder of his desperation. Evelyn's offer replayed in his mind, a chance to erase the debt, to finally breathe. But her cryptic warnings and the chilling ultimatum made it clear there was more to her deal than she was revealing. As the night wore on, Noah found himself pacing the room, his mind racing with possibilities. What if Evelyn's offer wasn't just about money? What if the price was something he couldn't measure? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He stopped abruptly, staring at his reflection in the darkened window. Am I willing to risk everything for this? He asked aloud, his voice barely audible. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the first rays of dawn crept through the blinds. And then, as if the universe had been waiting for his moment of doubt, his phone buzzed again. He picked it up hesitantly. Another message, this time with no sender. The price of trust is always higher than you expect. Noah sank into his chair, his hands trembling. The words felt like a warning and a dare all at once. The pieces of the puzzle were still scattered, but one thing was clear: whatever lay ahead, it would demand more from him than he could ever imagine. Noah sat on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. The weight of Evelyn's proposal pressed on him like a suffocating blanket. The darkness of his room offered no solace, and the faint hum of the city outside felt distant and uninviting. Every possibility played through his mind, each one heavier than the last. He could escape the clutches of poverty, but at what cost? His thoughts spiraled, and he whispered into the silence, "How far am I willing to go?" The question echoed back at him, unanswered. Memories of past struggles surfaced, a grim reminder of how desperation had shaped his life. Yet, Evelyn's deal felt different. It was not just about survival. It was about surrendering something deeper, something intangible. Morning came, but the questions lingered. At the cafe, Noah's unease was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. A sharp-dressed man with piercing eyes approached him. "You must be Noah," the man said, his voice calm but edged with warning. "I'm Oliver. I know Evelyn." Noah's heart raced as Oliver continued. "She has made offers like this before. Do you know what happens to the people who take them? They disappear. Their lives unravel. She is clever. I will give her that. But her promises come with a cost you cannot see." Noah's palms felt clammy. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely steady. "I am saying think carefully," Oliver said, his gaze unyielding. "She plays a long game, and by the time you realize the rules, it is too late." With that, Oliver left, his words reverberating in Noah's mind. That night, Noah sat in his apartment, reflecting on Oliver's warning. His thoughts drifted to the moment he had helped Evelyn, offering her a kindness he had not questioned. That memory burned brightly now, a stark contrast to the shadow of doubt Evelyn's proposal had cast. He realized that his decision back then had been selfless, driven by empathy rather than gain. Could he hold onto that same moral compass now? Determined to confront Evelyn, Noah arranged to meet her. She arrived with her usual composed demeanor, but Noah wasted no time. "I need the truth," he said firmly. "Why me? Why this deal?" For the first time, Evelyn's mask cracked. Her voice softened as she confessed, "Because I see a part of myself in you. I have been betrayed, used, and left to fend for myself. I made a choice to take control, no matter the cost. But you remind me of who I used to be before the pain." Her words struck a chord, but they also revealed the darkness behind her actions. Noah took a deep breath and said, "I cannot be part of this. If it means losing my integrity, it is not worth it." His words carried a conviction that startled even him. Evelyn looked at him, her eyes filled with something unexpected: respect. After a long silence, she spoke. "You are stronger than I thought," she said. "Maybe there is another way." She then offered a revised proposal, one that focused on building something meaningful together, a business venture aimed at helping others who were struggling. "You have shown me that redemption is possible," she said quietly. "Let us create something that reflects that." Noah hesitated, but this time the decision felt right. They began to work together, channeling their pain into purpose. Their collaboration became a testament to the power of honesty and empathy, transforming not just their own lives, but those of countless others. Kindness, Noah realized, had the power to ripple outward, creating change in ways he had never imagined. And as he stood at the crossroads of his life, he knew he had chosen the path that mattered most, not just for him, but for everyone who needed a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light could be found. Kindness has the power to transform lives. What would you risk for a stranger's promise? Share your story of generosity, and do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiration.